So the traditional way to build a gaming machine, you got your monitor, you got your gaming tower, and they're separate. Not today. So Colorful, of all people, reached out to sponsor a video featuring the iGame G1, a gaming all-in-one that I thought was pretty cool until I cracked open the box and had a look at this thing. That's it. It's that thin. You compare that to some other gaming monitor, and it's like, wait a minute, they put a whole PC in there too? Let's check this thing out, shall we? Accessories. Packing, ooh! Whatever, they sponsored this video, they knew what they were getting. Total victim blaming here right now, but I'm not even sorry. So honestly speaking, guys, I know almost as little about this thing as you do because Colorful did send me over a one-pager, but the problem is that it really was actually exactly one page. There's almost no information on it. So I do know that it has an 8th gen HK series processor, an RTX 2080, and it features a 144 Hz 1440p HDR 400 monitor, all integrated into this single unit. I do wonder a little bit about Colorful's customers though. Like, do they really need a warning about not touching the screen when you're using it? I guess people are used to touchscreens. It's the younger generation, you know? Accessory package, pretty straightforward. Got your power cord, you got your massive power brick, because yes, my friends, this puppy is looking at needing anywhere up to about 330 watts of power. I'm actually kind of impressed they've got those kinds of specs with a passive external power supply. It's quite possible that in addition to the mobile CPU, Colorful is also using a mobile GPU, but we're gonna find out exactly what kind of turbo speeds we can get out of it in just a moment here. I/O-wise, we've got 3 USB Type A's, a USB Type C, Ethernet of some sort. We're gonna find out how fast that is. Our power in, HDMI in and out. See, this is what I'm talking about. Why doesn't every AIO have this? Because one day, eventually, this computer will be slow, and it would be really nice if it could still be used as a monitor, and this one can. And then finally, we've also got, that is presumably a DisplayPort out and a Kensington lock. So the entire bottom has your on-screen display controls, your headphone and microphone jack. Nice to see dedicated jacks for those, as well as a whole whack of ventilation. The bottom here looks like a speaker grill with an array mic, as well as that's either an ambient light sensor or a webcam. Hard to tell at this point. We will find that out later. And then there we go. The entire top of the unit, more ventilation, and the back, more ventilation, and the sides, more ventilation. So these like gamery accents that are on the back of the monitor are actually just gamery ventilation. Oh, I saw this. Oh, that's cool. I thought this was maybe the power button, but it's actually a switch for the webcam. So I see what's going on down here. The ambient sensor's like over here somewhere. This is a Windows Hello enabled webcam, and then it just has a privacy shield on it. So you've got sound control, reset, reposition OSD, information, brightness contrast, a white point adjustment, overscan and resizing, and input select. And that is pretty much it. So what it looks like is that it's more like a monitor connected to a computer and less of like an embedded DisplayPort display being connected directly to a mobile GPU. But the only way for us to find that out for sure would be to crack it open, which I do intend to do. First, let's get some games loaded on this thing. It really is impressive how thin this thing is. Like, it just looks like a monitor. So however the cooling system intakes, which is probably through these vents here, as well as the bottom, it's definitely exhausting at the top. Oh right, I wanted to find out how fast the Ethernet is. Gigabit, okay, so just regular gigabit. We can see here it's definitely a mobile GPU in there because the connector here is laptop display. And no outstanding motion blur issues, which is really lucky because given that there's not a ton of fine control in the OSD, they could have easily cranked up something like the overdrive strength, and you could have ended up with a bunch of weird artifacts depending on how they decided to tune it, and it looks like they've taken a fairly sensible middle of the road approach to it. Oh, that was inevitable. It's got RGB lighting. All right, so while we wait for some games to install, let's go ahead and explore the config a little bit more. I've loaded up a couple utilities here. So first of all, in the NVIDIA driver, we're definitely running at 2560 by 1440, 144 hertz. But for those curious, no, it's not running in G-Sync, although I will do a driver update and see if that situation changes. Our CPU is a Core i9-8950HK, so it's a 6-core processor, 2.9 gigahertz base, and I haven't really hit it hard enough to see what it'll boost to, but you can see right here, just dragging a window around, it is boosting to 4.2 gigahertz. Actually, that's probably fairly representative now that I think about it, because we're also installing Doom in the background. That's not bad. So our all-core turbo is hovering around 3.45 gigahertz, not too shabby. We can definitely hear the fan ramp up though. Now she going. And it's done already. That is not a bad score, 1100. Pretty good for a mobile chip. Let's try R20. So it's a little bit on the louder side for a desktop, because remember, we're using laptop components. It's a super slim design, so it's like really more like a laptop, but like flat and in the form of a monitor. But temps are well under control. Our max there was 70 degrees on the hottest core, which is perfectly reasonable for one of these 6-core Core i9s. In fact, better than we see in laptops, really. Because realistically, because they are able to take in air from the bottom and exhaust it out the top, they actually have quite a bit more cooling flexibility here. As for our score, we are right up there with a 7700K, so we've got a clock speed disadvantage, but of course we've got 2 more cores, meaning that you could expect to get some legitimate work, whether it's photo editing or graphic design or even light video editing done on something like this. What we don't know yet is whether it's a max Q or a max P, that is quiet versus performance design. All right, we've got some games installed, but before we launch them, I want to play a fun little game that I like called Find the SSD OEM part number. It's more fun than it sounds. So you fire up Task Manager and you can see some basic information. We've got a 512 gig NVMe SSD from Samsung and then a whole bunch of gobbledygook over here. So we're gonna go ahead and key that, what is usually some kind of part number, into Google, and we end up with 2 hits. 1 hit. Dang, that's really not much. But that tells us all that we need to know. This is a Samsung PM981. So it's not necessarily the same as a 970 Pro, but it's a little bit better than a 970 EVO, meaning that you're looking at current gen flagship Samsung NVMe SSD performance on this thing. Not a bad thing to have. One thing that was noticeable about the config overall, actually, is that it's got 2 terabytes of hard drive based storage as well. So it really seems like the config here is optimized for something like a LAN cafe, where you want to save space, you want high performance, got RTX 2080, got a 6-core CPU, but you don't necessarily need the top of the line performance, and you need enough space to have a big game library, but you also don't need it to be that fast, so you can go ahead and throw a hard drive in for that. Very interesting. 144 hertz, VSync off, graphics, let's crank them. Highest with no motion blur. So I noticed the in-game volume was a little louder than I wanted, and my immediate reaction was to go into the OSD and adjust the volume in there. But nope. There we go. Software volume control only, my friends. Let's run the benchmark. I love that high refresh rate IPS monitors are a thing now. Like it used to be, you either had gaming performance or non-eye searing color fidelity. Why not both? Now it ramped up really strongly there for a second, but it seems like the way they've tuned the fan curve has it ramping up aggressively against a new heavy load, but then actually dialing back a little bit. It's not the kind of thing that you would hear over headphones, for example, but if you weren't using headphones, the fan noise is clearly audible. All right, fantastic. So average FPS of around 90 with details absolutely cranked and 60 degrees max. Not bad. I guess that's what happens when you can build what would effectively be a 27-inch laptop. You've got a ton more space for cooling. So our core clocks are up in the 1700 megahertz or so range. That is not too shabby for a mobile GPU. I gotta say, it is really impressive how far the tech has come in the last few years. Like, this is a great gaming experience, literally built into the back of a monitor. So it's sitting next to that Skull Trail machine that I actually showed a little while ago. So this is what a super high-end gaming rig looked like 11 years ago. Actually, guys, if you're not already subscribed, make sure you are so you don't miss our follow-up on this one. We're gonna be taking our Skull Trail machine and hooking it up with 2 RTX 2080 Ti's and SLI just to see what happens. In the meantime, though, What is going on here? Does that one screw just lift up the whole thing? So you turn this thing, that's why it was so hard to turn. And there's like a little mechanism in there, you see that? That like pries up the computer. Oh, I think I got it. Yep, there it goes. He's a madman, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, yep, there it is. We got 3 sides. And once you got 3 sides, the battle is basically over. Ooh. By the way, if you love the videos, or even if you don't, check out our merch, lttstore.com. It's good quality stuff. Okay. Interesting. They've actually packed the entire PC inside this shielded enclosure. So a lot of what I thought was ventilation holes actually isn't. So all that stuff along the bottom seems to be just kind of for styling. So the front is speaker grills for these 2 large speakers here. And then those ones at the back are intakes. And actually the vast majority of the cooling is handled by these 2 large heat exchangers here, each of which has 2 heat pipes. And like I had suggested, this one is dedicated to cooling the CPU with just this 1 thick heat pipe. And then this one does most of the heavy lifting for the GPU with a 3rd heat pipe, presumably coming off the GPU going over to this one. Now that we've gone this far, I don't think there's any way that we can avoid taking off this shield though. I sort of assumed everything would be kind of bare inside, but it's much more tightly integrated than some of the gaming AIOs that I've seen in the past. Look at this. That has got to be the thickest thermal pad I've ever seen. Now, normally you probably wouldn't bother with a thermal pad on something like this, but because of the way they've designed the cooling, with almost no sort of just general airflow in here, and most of the cooling handled by taking this heat and moving it out via heat pipes and then expelling it, I can see why they'd feel like they need to do that. So this, our M.2 drive here, is also cooled by a thermal pad up against this giant heat spreader. So that's what it actually is. It seems to be more of a heat spreader. Here's our Intel wireless. And then as I had guessed, our CPU is handled by the 1 heat pipe and our GPU and memory is handled by these 3. And that explains why our thermals were so good, because these are chonky heat pipes. Pretty impressed by those. I just want to see if there's more SODIMM slots down there. Really does not look like it. Like maybe there's somewhere else to solder them on, but I don't think the actual mounts are soldered on. So the last thing of note here is that we do have an additional M.2 slot, so we could expand our storage again should we see fit. So that's it, that's all guys. If you like this teardown, we've actually got a monitor repair guide that you're definitely gonna wanna check out, and bye!